Well, we'll start with this video pretty soon, but I wanted to let you folks know that this is one of the videos within my How to Hunt the Rut web class that is coming soon. This is one of the actual videos in the class, so there's quite a few other videos in that class. I encourage you to check it out. Check out how to design your whitetail parcel and also how to plant food plots. Those are my 3 web classes that I have. They'll all be out soon. The food plot and how to design your property has been out. But let's get right into this because the rut is just around the corner, along with how to hunt the rut coming soon. So let's get started. So when will the rut begin in your area? Well, I can say that when it does begin, it's a trickle. And that pre-rut doesn't come in just slamming in. It's a trickle, and you have to notice the subtle signs that the rut is beginning. And we'll talk about some of those signs. But don't expect to go out and just sit all day during the pre-rut and when the rut begins and expect all day action. You're not going to get that. But what I do see consistently and how I've shot a lot of mature bucks, the oldest bucks in the neighborhood, is by watching for these signs to begin, expecting the pre-rut to begin, and then going out to my favorite morning hotspot and shooting a buck that's on his feet during the morning hours all the way up until lunchtime, maybe even 1 o'clock for the first time for the year. And so he's really moving, very active, and that's when that pre-rut is beginning, but it's a trickle. You're not going to, again, not going to see this all day movement, so you can't look for that. But when the rut is beginning, look for some of the subtle signs that we're going to mention, and that rut will be just around the corner when it's really slamming home. But don't ever underestimate the power of the pre-rut to put a core buck that we'll talk about later right at your feet and really be waiting for it and be ready. Number 2, this is no surprise. Studies have shown this for many years. Ultrasounding does of exactly when the date of conception was, just like you would a human fetus, has been taking place for decades. And so folks can go back and see the exact timing of the rut. And you have to be very wary. There's different models that different states use to determine when the rut is beginning, the length, and they make assumptions. But really, when it boils down to it, is what activity you're seeing in the woods. And there's a lot of generalities for when the rut begins, but rest assured, again, there's no surprise, it'll take place at the exact same time every single year in your area. Now, what I see is the last 10 days of October, especially the October 20th, 22nd, 24th, it will begin. You'll start to see those signs in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, over into northern Pennsylvania, into upstate New York, over into Vermont or Hampshire. Kind of get the picture, that whole northern tier of a lot of whitetail states, you'll start to see that pre-rut activity. When you move down and you get into more, let's say, Iowa, over into southern Illinois, southern Indiana, southern Ohio, over into West Virginia, Tennessee, even Kentucky. You get into some of those more mid-tier states, you're going to notice that rut is beginning about a week to 10 days later when that pre-rut begins. Now, when you move over into Oklahoma, you could be in that same group as that mid-tier state, but when you get down into Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, and some of those few select states, you can have a real trickle rut that just takes place a little bit here, a little bit there, and there's no consistency. And when you get into some of those states, you really have to truly hunt by the weather, because that's going to push that movement during daylight. And that's what happens a lot of times. You'll notice that depending on the weather, and we'll skip down to that number 5, why don't you see the rut? Weather is part of the factor. Deer will still rut at the same time, but if the weather is really poor, it's very hot, very windy, very stormy, there'll be a lot of rutting taking place at night under the cover of darkness. You're just not going to witness it. But studies will show no matter what the weather, no matter what the moon phase, the rut takes place at the same time every single year. It has to do with photo period. So as the amount of light is decreasing in the sky, that happens the same every year. And this is why leaves turn colors within days of each other. They begin to turn colors every single year. That's why peak fall colors in the UP of Michigan, northern Minnesota take place at the same time every year. It's not like one year it's the end of September, and the next year it's the end of October. It all takes place within a few days every single year, and deer are no different because they both have to do with photoperiod and the amount of light left in the sky. It's very different though, because another reason why you don't see the rut, look at non-core bucks. That's a big difference right there. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but again, the same time every year, and that's a good thing. It's something that you can count on. Water hole use. We have a lot of water holes around here in the hills in Minnesota, Wisconsin. You might have water holes where you're at. Maybe you have old swamps or lakes or ponds where you see deer activity. When you begin to see those bucks hitting water during the middle of the morning, late morning, early afternoon, midday, typically a time they're not exposing themselves out in daylight and really moving around, they're thirsty, they're working up a thirst. And what's interesting, you'll see this happening during some of the coldest mornings when deer are actually on their feet. Bucks are actually cruising. They're not going to cruise when it's real hot, so they don't build up that thirst. They just sit back in their bedding area and don't move. If any of you have played sports, whether it's soccer, football, baseball, whatever sport you're doing outside, track, cross country, you'll notice it doesn't matter how cold you are, you work up a thirst when you're out there moving around and doing your thing, playing your sport. And the more active you are, the more thirsty you are. I've used this example often, but we're playing hockey growing up as kids out on the ice. It's 10 degrees. And my friend's mother came out and was shocked that we were out there playing in t-shirts. But we were a bunch of sweaty teenagers playing on the ice, and we're playing hockey or playing hard, our faces are red, and we were thirsty. And we built up that thirst not because of the temperature, but because of our activity levels, and that's why bucks hit those water holes. So when you see the water hole use pick up, all of a sudden, deer go from just hitting it mostly in the afternoon, going from dry bedding areas to afternoon food sources. They'll hit that water on the way because they're thirsty. They've been eating acorns, twigs, and woody shrub tips, hardwood regeneration, briar tips all day long in their bedding area. They can't wait to wash it down with some water on the way to their afternoon food source. So look for water hole use to pick up, and that's a really big sign. What's really nice about when the rut begins and knowing that it takes place at the same time every year in your area is that it's very easy to plan. And that's what I take comfort in. I know that my rear end better be in a stand, and I better be paying attention around October 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, when that rut and that pre-rut is starting to begin. When you get down here, number 5, why don't you see the rut? I'm going to put weather in here too. And what's interesting is, why don't you see the rut compared to one of your neighbors? Well, if you don't have a core buck, a buck does not move very far in the pre-rut to go find does. He's already in a place that has good quality food and habitat. What does that mean? That means there's already does there. He's not there because of the does. He's there because of the quality habitat and food. The does are there because of the quality habitat and food. He's there because of the quality habitat and food, and that he has his own space. That he has an area where he's not been pressured and he can live there. But when the rut starts, he can get on those does and start to rut immediately. He has no reason to travel a mile like a non-core buck and come to your land during the middle of the rut. Last year, a lot of people, we had really warm weather around first part of November. In fact, Minnesota gun opener was around November 5th, and it was incredibly hot. I think it got over 70 degrees that day. Deer don't move very much, even though it's during the middle of the rut. A lot of people thought the rut hadn't even started yet. They're getting into early November, the rut hasn't even begun yet, pre-rut hasn't begun. No, it was too hot. And if you don't have a core big buck or a mature buck, think about it, those mature bucks, they move several times more than a young buck. They leave many times more sign. You know, a 1.5-year-old buck, a yearling buck, not a fawn. Yearling and fawns are two different things. You know, make sure you know that distinction. A yearling buck has his first set of antlers. A fawn is only a few months old. But a yearling buck, he only makes a few rubs and scrapes during the year. But a mature buck that's 4, 5, 6 years old, he could make hundreds of rubs and make dozens of scrapes. So think about that. When you're seeing lots of sign, that mature buck is around. If there's bad weather, you might not see him moving during the daylight. If you have core bucks, then you're going to see that pre-rut begin, but your neighbor 2 miles away, he'd say, I'm not seeing anything yet, but it's because he has to wait for bucks to either come from your land or someone else's land to come through, and he's not going to witness that pre-rut The weather does not begin the pre-rut. What it does provide for, though, is daytime and daylight rutting activity. Obviously, if it's 85 in central Ohio on October 29th, you're probably not going to see any type of appreciable movement that you can count on because of the hot weather, and bucks are just laying low. At the same time, if it's October 30th and it's now 27 degrees or 37 degrees or 47 and the temperature just dropped 20, 25 degrees, it's all relative. It doesn't matter if it drops from a daytime high of 78 to 58 or if it drops from 58 to 38. Bucks will experience that temperature change. Then you're all of a sudden going to see daytime rutting activity. So if the weather's bad, if you don't have core bucks, if you've applied too much hunting pressure, then you might not witness the beginning of the rut. And it's very important then that you know the signs. Now, it's not a bad thing if you have to wait for those non-core bucks, but know that the peak rut, if you're in southern Michigan, southern Ohio, central Wisconsin, it's going to happen at the same time every year. Southern Wisconsin, probably going to be peak rut 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, in that time range through the 14th of November. When you're in southern Ohio, you can move that back a week to 10 days. If you're in northern Kentucky, you're going to see that rutting activity more from the 10th of November, mid-November, through 20th, 24th of November, sometime in that time range. You can even look over into Kansas. That'd be the same time frame as southern Ohio. So look at that when you go from north to south for that sliding scale. And then, of course, when you get down in the true south, that trickle rut can happen at any time. And let's face it, when deer are born early down there, when fawns are born in April, they'll probably live. You don't have 3 feet of snow like you do in the UP of Michigan. At the same time, when they're born in July, late July or August, they'll probably live. They'll have spots going into the hunting season, but they'll live because you don't have that extremity of weather. And that's when you go further north and those weather conditions are very extreme, that rut will be a lot tighter window. Look for some of these signs. Some of the signs, of course, water hole, morning movement, deer working up a thirst, those bucks are moving a lot. So you'll notice that movement that last 10 days of October, somewhere maybe early November if you're more southerly, but you'll notice that on water holes. At the same time, rubs and scrapes. This is an outstanding time to take note of all the scraping activity. And you might have 3 or 4 scrapes here and there, and I'm talking natural scrapes, not your mock scrapes, but you'll have these natural scrapes that pop up. And that's where you have a horizontal licking branch. Deer don't typically use that year round. That's why we use the vertical licking branches right in the trail. They hit those often. You can look up my YouTube channel. I have over 40 mock scrape videos on that. But when those natural scrapes begin to pop up, you know the rut's begun. And we used to come out and hunt every couple weeks in Wisconsin. We'd travel 7 hours down from the UP of Michigan. We're always here in mid-October. It always worked out that we're here when the season begins. 2 weeks later, we're coming down for a 2-3 day weekend, 2 weeks later. And that would put us to a time frame, and we'd time it out. So we were here in early November to experience that peak rut. Well, we were here 2 weeks earlier. There was a handful of scrapes around the entire property. And then we'd come back early November and we'd find dozens of scrapes, fresh rubs. And we'd think, boy, we really missed something. And what we were missing was that actual pre-rut activity. That was back in 2002, 2003, 2004. And boy, how times have changed since that time to where I look at, that's the pre-rut. I want to be there when those scrapes are exploding in the woods, and that's when those mature bucks are really on their feet for the first time. We were always missing that 20th, 22nd, 25th, 27th time frame of October, and that's when all that sign's laid down, and that's when I want to be there during those first cold front times, because those first cold fronts are going to put bucks on their feet during the day. Not that it's going to start the rut, start does into estrus, it's just going to start daylight activity. So you really need to pay attention when that weather's changing, when those cold fronts come through. Chasing. What's interesting about chasing is that you'll see these little bucks. I think some of the big bucks are excited, they're making scrapes. These little bucks don't know what to do. You'll start to see some chasing, especially when it comes to those little bucks, chasing does that aren't ready. They're really looking around, but you're looking for big buck activity, mature buck activity, and that could be a lot different. Even with rubs, you'll see rubs really pop up when bucks are first shedding their velvet, and that'd be in early September. Right now, as we're shooting this video, that'd be in early September. And those bucks are just shedding, they make a few rubs, and then they seem to really slow down during October. It almost looks like there is an actual lull when there's not. It's just they're not laying down sign. Their testosterone levels aren't that high. But boy, when you get into the end of October, testosterone levels are going up. Bucks start to break apart, especially from their favorite preferred bachelor groups and hangout partners and buddies that they're hanging around with. They start to separate because things are about to get serious. And that's when the rubs start popping up again. But certainly the explosion of fresh, natural scrapes is a great sign, and then a little bit of chasing too. So when does a rut begin in your area? Well, the cool thing is once you figure that out, it's at the same time every year. The only difference you're going to see is if you have older bucks, you're going to get to experience the pre-rut. If you don't, you likely won't get to experience the pre-rut. You're going to have to wait 7 to 10 days. Doesn't mean the rut hasn't begun. It just means you don't have older bucks on your property. And certainly too, if we have a really warm pre-rut, which we never do, there's always a cool down in there. Even if it's just 2 or 3 days out of a 10-day period, the last 10 days of October, like around here in southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, you can look at that time. If you see a major cold front coming through on the 19th, 20th, then you can expect some great pre-rut activity on the 21st, 22nd. If that front doesn't come through till the 27th of October, then you're going to see great movement on the 28th, 29th. So pay attention to those timings. Pay attention to whether you have non-core or core bucks on your property, which bucks you're actually hunting. Again, a non-core buck, you're going to get very infrequent pictures, more middle of the night in September, October. A core buck, you're going to get lots of pictures of in and around daylight, consistent pictures. That doesn't mean every day. That means a few times a week as opposed to a few times over a couple month period. That just means he's in the area, he's focusing on your property during the daylight. And aside from having a great rut, I want you to have great hunting properties, whether you're finding a great spot to hunt on public land or you have private land that you can hunt. It's just the same. I want you to find those core bucks. I want you to hunt non-core bucks too during the peak of the rut. But it all begins with that pre-rut timing, and it's going to take place at the same time every year. So there's no surprise with this video right here. But when you realize that, and when you understand that, it can set your rut game every year and allow you to find consistent success for the rest of your life, because that sets the timeline for the pre-rut into the rut lockdown, the peak rut, the post-rut, the second rut, and even the third rut. I experienced some great rutting activity early January last year in southwest Wisconsin. It was very cool to see. But again, I want you to have a successful hunt, and part of that success, a big portion of that, a large portion of that, begins with the understanding that the rut begins at the same time where you hunt every single season.